Let's speak about bondage and spiritual oppression. Most Christians have struggled at some moment in their lives, or maybe even quite frequently, with the difficulty that the regular practice of Christian life are not able to alleviate. He goes to confession, the Eucharist, has a life of prayer, spiritual direction, but this bondage is maintained. Spiritual bondage refers precisely to the kind of situation in which our will is to some degree bound or constrained, such that our conscience may not even perceive that something is amiss. The will is not fully destroyed, since it may be free in most situations, but it is impeded in some circumstances so that its range of action is limited. For example, a woman may be peaceful and self-controlled most of the time, but underneath, she is carrying deep-seated rage against her mother, so that when she is with her mother, she often loses control and ends up in a heated argument. In such cases, the will is present but unable to act. It is like a limb that is paralyzed but not amputated. It's useful to compare spiritual bondage with sin and demonic possession. Spiritual bondage has not been developed very much by theology. Theologians have, for the past century, considered possession, but not oppression or obsession or vexation. They've left that field wide open. They just haven't dealt with it because they didn't believe in demons. But some have explored the area of demonic possession, especially exorcists. Spiritual bondage and sin. Human free will means that we are responsible for our acts, whether good or evil. Our will cannot be forced. Even if a part of me does not want to commit a sin, if I do commit it, that means that on some level I did want it. Because of original sin, our will is weakened and inclined to evil. Rather than being wholly set on what is good, our will is often divided. We want good, we want evil. We're attracted to one, we must make a choice. Sin and spiritual bondage seem quite similar in that both involve the will. However, in the case of sin, the will is divided, whereas with bondage, the will is constrained. A divided will truly wants the sin it is committing, which is why the sinner is still, to some extent, free and responsible. But it also truly wants not to do it. It's divided, which is why the person can fight against the sin. A constrained will, on the other hand, is practically unable to fight. Spiritual bondage is very close to what traditional moral theology calls a vice, a habit of sin created by repeating a particular sin. This strong tendency becomes extremely difficult to resist, as if the side of the divided will that inclines to the sin is so reinforced that the other side is almost helpless. What is the influence of the devil and demons in regards to sin? Some sins, even smaller sins, are the result of direct demonic temptation. However, temptation is only temptation. Demons do not and cannot cause sin. Most theologians agree that they cannot directly influence our mind and will, but only our imagination, emotions, the material world around us, and in some cases, our bodies. They scare or deceive or tempt us into a choice, but the choice is ours. Moreover, direct demonic temptation is not a factor in every sin. The pull of disordered desires, the temptations of the flesh and the world are enough in many cases. But it is also true that sin always puts us under the dominion of the devil. But his influence remains a moral influence. The devil has only a moral influence on sinners, to the extent that they consent to the actions he suggests. They freely follow his wishes and do his works. Let's talk about spiritual bondage and possession. In some cases, however, the denomination is deeper. They act under the influence of the devil. The person has lent himself consciously or unconsciously to an inner control that goes beyond the normal capacity of the forces of evil. The person has given demons a right that they do not possess in themselves. That is what happens in the case of what is traditionally called possession. Spiritual bondage can best be understood as a milder form of this inner hold. It's an influence rather than control. It is possible to distinguish between a form of control that touches the whole of the person and a partial influence, where the mind or will is impeded only in certain areas. Possession is a rare and extreme situation, while spiritual bondage, especially in its milder forms, may touch every aspect of life. Let's look at different types of spiritual bondage. First type is overwhelming negative emotions, toxic emotions that we spoke about at level 3, such as guilt, fear, jealousy, despair, resentment, deep anger, rage, or hatred. Another type of concerns repetitive and obsessive thought patterns. For example, an attraction to death, a habit of legalism, a habit of interpreting the action of others as an attack on oneself. A third kind of bondage is behavioral, an irresistible urge to isolate oneself in difficult moments, or a constant need to control situations or people. Repetitive sins, compulsory temptations, such as pornography, gambling, lying. In some cases, addictions can be accompanied by demonic influence. Bondage may also be a possessive or unhealthy relationship to a person, even with someone who's deceased. It can also, another type of bondage, it could be an unhealthy or idolatrous relation to objects. What is the origin of spiritual bondage? Understanding the origin of a spiritual bondage helps the process of deliverance immensely. First, there is trauma or wound or a psychological disorder, which gives a doorway or foothold to an evil spirit. Second, there is a consent given by the person, which opens the door or allows the foothold to be used.